So good to see you. Unfortunately, we cannot meet each other in Stockholm as planned due to the worldwide health crisis. Due to the outbreak of COVID-19 from China all over the world, many countries were locked down. Hungary and the Netherlands declared a state of emergency on March 11th, and both countries had a partial lockdown from the second half of March onwards. The museums in the Netherlands closed their doors to the public on March 13, and Germany went in total lockdown on March 22, and the United Kingdom on March 23rd. March 14 was the day that the United States declared that no visitors from Europe were welcome anymore. And now we're almost more than 2 months later, and life is getting a bit more normal again. And despite the virus, more things are allowed. Infection disease decrease and pressure on intensive care units become more manageable. Museums are allowed to reopen the doors, provided that they follow the necessary guidelines. The most important one is the 1.5 meter or 5 feet measure. We must wear a face mask in public transport and in many countries and museums as well. In the Netherlands, museums must adhere to one-way traffic. Entry and exit must not be in the same place. Only some people are allowed to visit the museum a day. Today we meet online with curators from Germany, Anja, Hungary, Júlia, the United Kingdom, Mark, the United States, Robert, and the Netherlands, myself. And the first question I would like to ask to all of you is, how are you doing?
Well, thank you for having me. I must say, personally, I'm very well. Sometimes I feel a little bit ashamed to say, confronted with all these dramatic death rates and financial bankruptcies and sorrows of many people. I'm also very grateful because we were in the lucky situation that our Rembrandt exhibition could welcome visitors until the very end, the 1st of March. Unfortunately, that was really nice. We could do this in a rather relaxed mood also, with hugging and kissing and all these things. But of course, our cooperation partner, Prague, was hit very badly. We still do not know, but hope that the drama will end in a happy end, that as a second venue, the Rembrandt exhibition can open in Prague in September. So this is perhaps a first state of mind from Cologne.
On my screen, I'm next. I feel relatively safe. I'm back in the museum since May 18th. That was a decision by the mayor of Birmingham. I'm a city employee for the city of Birmingham. And that meant that about half of my museum staff returned to work. There was a great deal of anxiety that went along with it. I'm fortunate that I have an office to myself and I can close the door. So I'm pretty much all day in my office. And whenever I leave it, I wear a mask, which I'm required to do. The state of Alabama has perhaps not been hit as hard as some other places in the United States. At the same time, numbers are steadily increasing, and I think our reproduction factor is still north of 1. So there's a great deal of uncertainty when it comes to the future. Of course, we're trying to save money left and right. The museum let go part-time employees, is committed to keeping all other employees on payroll. But especially from the city side, which heavily relies on tax revenue, we're sort of all a little anxious and waiting for the shoe to drop. So that's the health crisis. But then, as you know, there is another pandemic that's ravaging this country and many others at the moment, and that is police brutality and racism. And that's very much at the forefront of everyone's thinking at the moment, given recent events with the killing of George Floyd. And these two crises, I think, are very much connected. And I think both will accelerate trends and developments that had begun earlier, and surely will also prompt some new ones. And my sense is that there is some fundamental change that's coming towards museums, hopefully initiated by museums, ranging from how they're governed, how they're funded, how they operate, values, mission, what they do, who does it, and who they do it for. So I think it's a really important and crucial time.
I think there are a lot of demonstrations in Europe as well regarding the death of George Floyd on May 25th, and especially in the UK. So perhaps Mark can hook on that as well.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Well, I'll first fill you in with what I've been doing. For the last 3 years, I've been working on an exhibition that was supposed to open on the 15th of May. Renaissance watercolors from Dürer to Van Dyck. The book exists, but the show doesn't. I and my co-curator, Anja, signed off the final proofs on Thursday, the 12th of March. I was told on the 16th of March the show was cancelled, and 2 days later the V&A closed. We are, of course, still closed. The museums, the National Museum, has decided more or less of their own bat that closure was necessary. Tate closed on the 17th of March, the V&A and the BM on the 18th, and the National Gallery on the 19th. Most others round about then or shortly after. For a couple of days, staff worked on alternate days and were then all sent home, where, of course, some could work remotely, others couldn't work remotely. Conservators, for example, had nothing to conserve. On the 20th of April, 75% of the museum staff were sent on furlough on full pay. I will be sent on furlough tomorrow, so you've just caught me, as it were. But of course, I'm at home. Nobody's in the museum apart from the guards and other security staff and so on. Now, our funding body, the Department of Culture and Science and so on, has advised that we may return from the 4th of July, but in practice, most museums are likely to be returning in stages between then and September, and almost certainly not all at the same time, because the public transport system wouldn't permit people to get to the museums either. So there's a whole load of issues here. I think that's about as far as I can go before getting involved in fortune telling. You mentioned the George Floyd killing and the stir this has created internationally. I don't know if you want me to say 1 or 2 words about that also.
Yes, please.
Then in the UK, there's been a very big response to that. I mean, I don't know if you saw a film on TV of the statue of the Bristol slaver being thrown into the dock.
That was also in the journal in the Netherlands. Yeah.
Which was quite an interesting piece of television the other day. Now, I think the murder of George Floyd, the alleged murder, I should say, is very significant to the UK for at least 2 reasons. It's partly that our culture, tourism and so on is more closely aligned to the American model than the European. And of course, on account of our imperial legacy and our shared history with the US and large BAME population, the issue feeds directly into very major issues of concern here. And I mean principally, of course, the underrepresentation of BAME visitors and indeed staff in UK museums. What has a bearing on this, for example, is the recent appointment of Gus Casey Hayford from the Smithsonian and the National Museum of African Art in Washington to be the inaugural director of V&A East. I mean, he's just arrived, in fact. Other issues, of course, include the whole issue of decolonization of collecting and interpretation and the repatriation of cultural objects. You can imagine the UK papers have been talking again about the Benin bronzes and the Magdala loot in the last few days. So this is, I think, why it's been such a burning issue here. I don't doubt it has been also in other countries other than the States.
Júlia, would you like to add something? Is the George Floyd murder also in your country a big issue, or is it especially Corona?
Absolutely, both of them. So back to your first questions.
How are you?
I am. Luckily, my family, my colleagues, and I are fine. But I'm sitting at home now. Due to the pandemic, the museum has been closed since the middle of March. We were supposed to open our Amenhotep II and his age, this Egyptian exhibit in April, but unfortunately that never happened. The museum is currently negotiating a later opening for the exhibit for the spring of the next year. And we are in contact with all our partner institutions, which were also affected by the pandemic, regarding our paintings that got stuck abroad. Some of them have reopened their exhibition and asked to extend the loan period. So we had negotiation with the Cologne, with the Anja, about this Rembrandt exhibition going to Prague later in this year. So everything a bit uncertain, I can say.
Yeah, it's a really uncertain time. We were lucky that we had an exhibition for, sorry, we were lucky in Utrecht that we had an exhibition planned for 6 months. It was open just 2 weeks before the lockdown started in the Netherlands. And now we reopened last Monday, or Monday a week ago. So luckily it's still standing till the end of September. So we don't have an invention in the plans for other exhibitions. But it's also, the future is of course very difficult, but what kind of exhibition you can still make? Is it still possible to travel a lot and that sort of things? And that's also one of the next questions I would like to ask. What's your perspective of the future and of your work? And as a curator, can you make still international exhibitions, blockbuster exhibition, that sort of things? Or is it better to concentrate on your own permanent collection and your own strength of the collection? Would you like to start, or?
I think it's also depending on your own collection, what you have. So I think it's not the same situation, for example, with the Louvre or the Rijksmuseum, than with the little museums. So that's not the same situation.
Yeah, that's
for
true.
For example, it's you can't do the same things. Never.
No, but I gave a lecture a few years ago at CODART about that our museum is a middle-sized museum and we're depending on visitors. We get paid from the state for the amount of visitors each year, and we can only get paid for more than 100,000 visitors each year, and it's not possible to cap them this year, of course. But we only have visitors for exhibitions. They're not coming for our permanent collection. So it's very difficult. So our director also decided, let's continue preparing exhibition as you planned. And it is difficult because my next exhibition is only for 2022, but you're now already discussing about what is still possible. Do we still have the money in that time? So it's indeed very difficult. Can I ask one of the others?
I think fundamental issue is that the business plan of most British museums evaporated in the last 2 months. All the basis on which we planned how we were going to get by have changed completely. It's too early to tell if this will be a blip like the stock market crash, or if it will be the new normal in some shape or form. none of us know. A great deal depends on whether a vaccine will become available in the next year or two. If it does, I reckon it'll be rather like the stock market crash, only worse. Clearly, if social distancing becomes the norm, we'll be wondering how we're going to manage schools, how we're going to manage shops, how we're going to manage buses. Frankly, what happens in museums is going to seem a minor concern. And I see no point in us discussing that at this juncture. I mean, clearly it's a big issue that none of us can move on. In the UK, coronavirus has highlighted the shortcomings of the neoliberal arts model, which UK museums share in part with American museums more than European ones. We don't charge admission. We don't charge general admission. The government provides about half of our funding, and the other half comes from commercial means. A 20% drop in visitors equals an income drop of at least 50%. I mean, the V&A is lucky it has 3 million visitors a year. 20 years ago, it only had 1 million. About 55% of these are from the UK. The National Gallery and the British Museum have 6 million visitors a year, but 65% of these are non-UK. None of these foreign visitors are going to show up anytime soon. So until that matter is resolved, clearly the unknown unknowns, if I can quote Donald Rumsfeld, are so huge that any kind of planning becomes effectively impossible. However, I think I'm the oldest person present in this little group, and I remember the museum world of the 1970s even, when blockbuster shows were the exception, not the rule. We all had plenty to do working on the permanent collection and more modest shows for a more local audience. And I think we all need to ask ourselves, why do we organize exhibitions? We need to ask our directors that, we need to ask our trustees that, and we need to ask our public that. And if the answer is to make money, well, then I think we've lost our sense of direction, and we need to recalibrate, as curators, we need to recalibrate our plans.
That's a very good point. Thank you.
In the near term, it will, of course, the financial impact is first and foremost, I think. Travel of people and objects will look vastly different, and that has an impact on acquisitions, research, loans, patron engagement, things like that. In the near term also, in terms of especially smaller scale exhibitions, I think having seen how much of the content has suddenly moved online, there's a lot of things happening on social media, on the website. Are we replicating what we've been doing before this crisis hit online, or is our program and exhibition making, especially in the near term, shifting to address these current crises in one way or another? Is it, do you celebrate healthcare workers through a program and exhibition? Do you offer historical perspectives on past crises? I think that is something sort of, how does it shift the things that we do and what we provide to our publics? In the long term, I think some of the experiences that we've had will probably stick, especially looking at the coronavirus. I think working remotely is something that we will continue to do in some way, shape, or form. And that certainly has an impact, I think, also. As I have much fewer interactions with my colleagues now, and in my experience, great ideas often develop out of conversations, unscheduled conversations with colleagues. I wonder what the impact is on creativity. And the online component, I think, is something that will stick as well. With regard to exhibitions, especially the blockbuster model for mid-size or smaller museums, it's just not something that is working, or at least I want to question that it is working. You know, if I put on an exhibition that costs, you know, $1.5 million and I charge admission at $15, that makes, very simple equation, 100,000 people need to come in the door. In a smaller market, perhaps I'm lucky if I get 20,000 people come see the exhibition. So it's just, it's from the get-go, it's not really a model that seems to work. I would venture to say for a great number of museums. And large-scale exhibitions of the blockbuster type, they often rely on name recognition. And I think that ties in the conversation that we're having and that we need to be having more of, thinking about social justice and what sort of the recent events are leading us to be and do. Do we want to focus scarcer resources on well-known, well-recognized names, big name artists, which likely often are male, or do we want to shift some of these resources and explore stories that have not been told? So that is sort of some of the questions that come up in my mind.
Anja, I think you're the only one sitting in the museum, really in the foyer, where also visitors can come already to your museum. Since when your museum is open again?
We started on the 5th of May, but I must say, I mean, the visitors numbers are of course more symbolically at the moment. People are also, I think, hesitant, still nervous about intermingling, and of course I think, to be honest, museums probably are for many people not the first thing they think of after the loosening of the lockdown. It costs money. We don't have free entrance, but we have one day in the month, the first Thursday always, when there is no entrance fee, and on that day we really had around 300 visitors, which is a good rate for nowadays. Yeah, so, but it goes slow. I mean, we have small exhibitions on show, presentations, one-room presentations, cabinet focus exhibitions, which of course are not blockbusters, attracting masses. But I guess we as curators, I mean, we are not driven by preparing blockbusters. We want to have well-researched storytelling exhibitions which enrich our visitors, which really give new insights. And this is not, I think, our aim to. These are more marketing tools, I would say, these big names, that once in a lifetime's aura of exhibitions, and perhaps we just need to educate also the media to pay more attention to smaller but well researched and interesting focus exhibitions, and also of course our administration. And what, on a positive note, I must say, what I felt in dealing with the Rembrandt exhibition and its transfer to Prague, I mean, there's such a, since it is a globalized crisis, we are all sitting in the same boat. I felt so much solidarity, patience, empathy. And I think this spirit we should use to cooperate in a better way. I mean, I think regarding fees, we ask for each other, regarding squeezing money with insurances, just shipping tax money from one museum to the other and things like that. Perhaps replace it with more state indemnity schemes, with more cooperation on between the collections. Perhaps this can be a kind of improvement, and staying in such staying in touch and discussing these issues within curators, but of course mostly in directors' gremiums.
And did you have your museum, did they have to make a lot of adjustments before they could open again? Are there a lot of guidelines they have to?
Yeah, I mean, there we have all over labels, keep distance, we give face masks, disinfection, and gloves to our visitors. And of course, at the moment, we don't have any educational programs. We don't have guided tours. We don't have lecture and gatherings in the museum, but we hope to do this from July. So, I mean, it goes a little bit back to
normal.
also these pedagogical things and to get in touch with your public, which I'm really looking forward to, because this is of course one essence too. I mean, for art lovers who love their calm and peace and devotion to art in a one-to-one meeting, it's a paradise at the moment. I think we've never been so quiet in the exhibition rooms like now. But this is of course not what we want to stay forever.
The positive things of the coronavirus, indeed, you already said that it's very good to see. We had an exhibition on North-South art from Norway and Catalonia in our museum until the end of January, and it traveled through to Vic near Barcelona, and that was closed after a few weeks after the opening. And it was also, they asked for, can we postpone the exhibition? Is it possible? And we all the partners working together for that exhibition said, okay, we have to do that. And now it's open again until 15 September. So that's very good. But in some cases, it's also, we asked for loans from other countries for our exhibition, which has to be opening in September, but they postponed loans to other museums as well already. So everyone wants to do the best, I think. And it's very positive that so much information and content is placed online. But we want to go back to the normal situation, that we can give lectures and we can have groups visiting the museum. At the moment in our museum, it's only possible for 300 people to visit, and they have to online book their tickets beforehand. And they're also scared. They're still scared. So there are not a lot of people coming. The last weekend was very good. We had indeed almost 300 people each day. But it's so strange. It's very strange. Yeah. And is the rest also preparing for reopening already, or is there no idea about when, for example, the museum in Budapest is opening, or in London?
Yeah, we are planning on reopening the museum in the middle of June. So in the near future, but I don't know exactly, nothing.
No.
To be honest, but surely with strict health and safety regulation, that is the most important. And with the reopening, we are also opening our Dürer and his age exhibition, which will include 60 prints and drawings from our own collection. So it is a little bit go further on the theme what you are talking about. It will be very nice, I am sure, but you can see that these little exhibitions are not so interesting for people than the blockbusters. So it was so many blockbusters in the world that perhaps the aim is on the other side than this curators choices exhibitions. You know that we are always working something special and something with many many work, art historical work, but the big names are most interesting for the people, and that is not the best way to have more visitors for the not so interesting exhibitions.
With due respect, I think that part of the problem is that the only names the public knows are the big names.
That's true.
That's true. Yeah, absolutely.
Point out that there are other names than the big ones. The public will be none the wiser. I mean, we've had the monographic show now for about 120 years. I mean, I think the idea started probably, must have been with Rembrandt, wasn't it? Back in Amsterdam in about the 1890s. I think Augustus John went to the show anyway. I'm not so old as I remember it. But I mean, 120 years later, I think the whole issue of the monographic exhibition seems to me rather an archaic format. And in the shows, certainly in the shows that I've done that have dealt with big names, and I mean, Constable's a moderately big name, and Botticelli's a very big name, sought to problematize those big names by pointing out, of course, that no artist is an island, and that artists exist in a continuum of history. They have, if you like, a backstory, and they have a future, a legacy.
Well, for important stories that haven't been told, looking at artists that have been excluded, that have not been researched and not been presented to a wider public, I think the monographic model is still something that's valid. I'm thinking particularly about female artists of the past. But it does become more interesting to contextualize more and focus less on sort of the usual art of biography and the work itself. But I agree, it is a model that has worked for a long time, and I think other ways of presenting the history of art, specific artists, and specific periods are going to be coming to the forefront more and more. To your question, we have no plans of opening, no date has been set. We have an internal task force that is thinking through what that could look like. And we look forward to learning from sister institutions, especially in Europe, who are ahead of the curve. The sense here is right now it would just not be safe for staff and not be safe for our visitors, given where we are in the sort of trajectory of the epidemic. Yeah. And then the question is, of course, how do you make it a safe experience for visitors? Sort of make them feel safe in the space. But I think as I mentioned before, as it has been repeatedly said, the museum that closed will not be the museum that reopens. What does that museum that reopens looks like, apart from logistical aspects? Moving visitors through galleries, increasing signage or installing signage. How do we address this programmatically?
Yeah, I was really surprised how good my museum worked on the reopening and what they did to make it a safe environment for public and also for the staff. And that's the staff working on the floor. So as a curator, I'm not even allowed to come to the museum at this moment, especially only when I have really important things to do over there, but I can do everything from home, so that's really nice. And due to the guidelines from the state, we are supposed to work at home until September 1st. But we had to do a lot of adjustments to the exhibition and also for the routing in the museum, because we are in an old cloister building, so the corridors are not that wide, so you have to have one-way traffic. So we needed to make an extra exit to the museum so people can enter in one room and exit the museum on the other side of the museum. But the nice thing from this period is also that there are some funding institutions in the Netherlands who asked for museums to apply for money for an extra smaller exhibition, highlighting, for example, one painting or one sculpture from your own collection. And I was really happy that I could ask for money to the Rembrandt Foundation for this kind of presentation. So now I'm hoping that I will get the money, because it's also for local people, because we don't want to have people coming from outside of Utrecht to the museum, because we're not allowed to travel by train if it's not necessary. So it's more regional people are coming to the museum at this moment. And normally it's also, of course, tourists, but we don't have tourists in the Netherlands at this moment. So it's a very strange period. Yeah. And I hope that that you in the United States have a lot of examples in Holland, for example, but also in Germany from the European museums that opened already, when you can open your museum, and that we find out the way to do it.
Clearly, what's possible in one museum, or indeed in one city, is very different to what's possible in another. I mean, before I worked in London, I worked in Cardiff, which was a regional capital, if you like, and in Liverpool. And when I was in Liverpool, it was absolutely at the bottom of an economic slump. They were rioting in the streets and heaven knows what. And we simply did not have a, well, even an UK public. We didn't have such a thing. The only foreign visitors we had were on their way through Liverpool in the direction of Ireland, or from Ireland back in the direction of the UK. So I think clearly one can't generalize. But if we think again about blockbusters, I mean, they're part of this international nexus of worldwide travel. Now, if on account of global warming and so on and so forth, that has become perceived as being part of the problem, well, then I think we have some very existential questions to ask. Now, it won't affect my generation, but it will certainly affect the generation of younger museum curators. How are they going to negotiate that?
Well, I think in the United States, particularly, we talk a lot about the communities that we want and need to serve, and there is a great deal of civic responsibility that goes along with it. Museums are important places for gathering, for the exchange of ideas, so how, again, going back to the questions about, so programmatically, what do we do and what kinds of exhibition do we want to put our money behind going forward? Things like, you mentioned it, global warming, is that something that, as a civic institution, which has a loud and often credible voice still, is that something that we want to focus on? And I mean, given the events of recent weeks, social justice is at the forefront of the list of things that you need to consider. So what are the exhibitions that we want to do going forward? That's sort of a question that's going around in my mind more often than not.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I'm preparing an exhibition on the way paradise, earth paradise and heavenly paradise in art. And now it's also, you have to connection what you say about global warming. Earth as paradise, it is still existing in so many years. And also because of the coronavirus, you're also going to think, we're thinking about traveling and the paradise for people going on holiday to beaches with waves and that sort of things. But traveling is now so much more difficult, and everyone is talking about staying home for vacation. Is that going to be the new world? Is going to be back to normal, or is this the new standard? We don't know. And that's also something you have to think about for an exhibition. And is it still actual for within 2 years? It's possible that I don't think we will forget it, but it's going to be changed, of course, as well.
Well, advocating for, Anja, you're muted.
Am I muted?
Anja is.
Anja is.
There you go.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I mean, we had a nice premiere here in unpacking and installing a loan from the Maritime Museum in Rotterdam for our exhibition Poetry of the Sea, Netherlandish Marine Painting. And I mean, this was of course caused due to Corona. The crate arrived before the lockdown, the very last day, and then of course the courier couldn't come. So we did this online in a video chat, which worked out very well. So we all said, well, it's a question of trust, of course, and generosity, but it worked very well, and perhaps this can be a model. Of course, the artwork still would have to travel, but if we could cooperate in this way, we would have not only a financial, but also, of course, climate reduction. The same is true for meetings. Of course, I mean, there's nothing better than to meet in person, but I guess in many ways we learned that we can communicate also intensively via video chats and Zoom.
Like this.
Things like that, like this. I mean, it's not, I don't want to say it, that CODART conferences should be replaced by these kinds of meetings. But I think there is in the whole society, new models have come up which could help.
I should say that I think a lot of works of art simply shouldn't travel at all, and that too many works of art travel too often and too far. You know, we talked about the monographic show, and I'm sure, for example, that the National Gallery's monographic exhibition in Artemisia Gentileschi, when it happens, will be fantastic, and it's high time there was such a show. But do we need 10 Raphael shows this year? I say this as the creator of the Raphael cartoons, which were once the most famous works of art in England.
Well, and you mentioned Raphael, given that this organization is focused on early Netherlandish, Dutch, and Flemish art history and artists. I mean, you know, mention Raphael, mention Rubens, mention Rembrandt. You know, it's a good question.
I would just point out that the Raphael cartoons are designs for Flemish tapestries.
If I could briefly plug mid-size and smaller institutions working for one, I think doing a smaller show that are then also less expensive,
sure,
open up the possibility for collaboration, partaking in these important exhibitions, still international exhibitions, which might happen less frequently, with other institutions. So I could imagine that really, because in the United States especially, there is, in terms of the art world and the museum world, there's a lot of focus on major institutions on the East Coast and on the West Coast, and some in between. But there are many, many small institutions who are sort of left out of this. And doing smaller exhibitions would certainly open up ways that they could collaborate with sister institutions in this country and beyond.
Well, I mean, the Raphael Tapestries show we did in 2010 basically involved the loan of 6 objects from the Vatican. But those were, of course, the actual tapestries that the cartoons were designs for. And bringing them to London, you know, it was a one-off experience. I mean, they're only in London for 6 weeks. Of course, the exhibition wouldn't have happened at all if it hadn't been for the Pope's visit to England. It was, in a sense, a political gesture, but it was a wonderful gesture. And that, you know, is that a small show or a big show? After all, tapestries are very big, but there only were 6 of them.
Yeah, it's also, I think, a question of money, how much money it costs to bring them over from the Vatican to London. It's, of course, very nice that they were visible in London together with the cartoons, and that a lot of people from the United Kingdom can watch them over there, so they don't have to travel to Rome. But it's also the whole name of a blockbuster exhibition, the meaning of a blockbuster exhibition. I work in a middle-sized museum, and we never work, never make monographic exhibitions, because we have a lot of medieval pieces of art. We don't have the big names. We have one Rembrandt, but besides that, we have a lot of anonymous works of art. So a blockbuster exhibition in our museum is normally an exhibition that costs a lot of money and with a lot of international cooperation. But I think the blockbusters we are speaking about is indeed the big names that people know. Yeah. And I think we have to focus more on telling a story about something from your own collection. But in your case, the cartoons were part of your collection, so you're the only or the Vatican had to make the exhibition, or you. So it's fantastic.
I mean,
I saw it.
Because, you know, the original blockbusters were very large bombs.
Yeah.
And the very term is so crass. I mean, I think we should steer away from it. If I don't see any more blockbusters, I won't mind.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us, and indeed stay safe and do the good work. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.